rest of the sermon that he preached a couple of years before his death, entitled something like "The Inefficacy of Christianity," in which he bemoaned the lack of progress among his people in actually transforming his culture, especially as it relates to the Lord. And he notes his visitation among the poor in great detail and challenges his listeners who think the poor are poor because they are idle. Our translation, I think, would be lazy. He basically says, if you think the poor are poor because they're lazy, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. My liberty with his word. And I like that about him. And it's interesting as you think about just life in general and how things don't work out the way we envision them. But there's a power and control that takes things further than we might imagine. I wrote a little paper about Wesley's impact, not only on poverty, but how sanctification and his desire to achieve sanctification actually led to the development of the labor movement in Great Britain. Because after he died, all those religious societies became labor groups. And it's amazing how that grassroots infrastructure served Great Britain well after he was gone. But this is not about history tonight. I want to tell you about a woman named Jane. I met her today for the first time. On Thursdays, when I'm in town, I go to the corner of Dawson and Malcolm X, which is located right across the street from the new center we're building, called the Opportunity Center. It will be a center of opportunity that focuses on employment training, employment placement, literacy development, as well as health, nutrition, and just the safety and camaraderie of an accepting and respecting community. I really don't like to go where I'm not known or where there are no relationships. And so the last 17 months, every Thursday that I'm here, I sit out on the corner of Nelson and Malcolm X with a bottle of water, and I just give it to homeless people who are coming from the Interstate 45 passes toward the Austin Street shelter. And I have a remarkable conversation with people. Today, Jan sat down, and our food pantry people had prepared 65 meals, really great roasted sandwiches, boiled zucchini, and all this stuff, fruit, just really neat meals in these bags, which is very unusual for us. But she sat there eating her lunch, and I sat down beside her and just watch people and talk as we had a chance, and she began to cry. And she needed to talk. And she poured out her own story. She'd been homeless since 2010, following the death of her husband after 26 years of marriage. Her financial world collapsed. I think she has had in her life other issues, of course, like all of us have had. She was on the street, and she found herself as a widow, now depending upon a rather unsavory crack addict, because she was afraid to be out there by herself, as I would be, I think, as most of us would be. And prior to her coming to the corner today to have lunch, she had hit her in the face. And she was trying to figure out what she was going to do. The Austin Street shelter was an option. She didn't like it much. And we worked on some things together and came up with a plan that maybe she will pursue it, maybe she won't. It's interesting, after you've been outside for a while, how your mind begins to think. I expect most of us have no conception of that. But she may not have been ready to give up whatever security she had in a relationship with this abuser to go into an unknown place that might be better, but she couldn't see what was there. One thing I'm convinced of, the street bends everything. And if you have no platform for your life off the street, you're in a mess. And so I want to talk a little bit about housing as a human right, but I want to do it from the perspective of our reality in Dallas. We have a number of obstacles, and I would call them unsatisfying half measures, that prevent us getting on with the business of solving the problem of chronic homelessness in the city. We could do it. We could do it. But we have these obstacles, and the unsatisfying half measures masquerade as solutions and keep us from going all the way to the finish line on a completely different field. For example, shelters posing as housing is a real problem. Let me give you my principle. I mean, shelters are cheap, and if they're run halfway decently, they're semi-humane. But here's my measure. If you haven't got a wall you can hang a picture on, you ain't got home. And really and truly, I believe we should have a constitutional amendment that requires every night shelter in North America to include the word emergency in their title. It should be the Dallas Life Emergency Foundation Shelter, or the Austin Street Emergency Center, or the Union Gospel Emergency Night Shelter, or the Bridge Quick and Temporary Transition to Permanent Housing Place. But we don't. We can't abide the idea of people suffering for the most part outside, and so we create these great dormitories without even walls where there are cots lined up end to end and side by side. And we put people in there because that's better than the outside. We think. We never ask them what they think. And then we wonder why people resist going to a shelter. Now, to me, a shelter is like an eternal men's retreat. You've been there, haven't you? They rouse you up way too early. They make you come in and eat the food they prepare. They make you study the Bible when you should be on the golf course. They tell you when to go to bed. And then when they pass out the evaluations every year, the most common statement made by all the men on the men's retreat is, next year give us more free time. That's kind of the way it is in shelter. You're rousing out, and I have no idea why shelters rouse people out at 6:30 in the morning just so they can be right downtown in rush hour, so as to perpetuate the stereotypical thinking about those people among the business mind. I had a shelter director tell me one time, well, we don't want people just hanging around the shelter being lazy. They need to get out and do something, get them a job. Right. And you put me in a shelter for a month. I mean, look at me now. You wouldn't hire me the way I am now, just one day in this street. So, this whole notion of shelters as solving our problem is a real problem, and it's a real challenge. And I love the people who direct the shelters. They're my friends. I'm not being critical of that. I'm just saying that's not housing. It's something. It's important. It's an emergency situation. There's a woman who lives in our building downtown at 511 North Packard who was in a shelter in Dallas for 11 years before she came to her apartment in our building. Give me a break. She's 65 years old. She lived for 11 years in a shelter. I mean, you would think someone would have figured out how to give her a place to live. Transitional housing. That's another one. And, again, I got lots of friends who are in transitional housing. I called one today about Jan. Paige Flynn's one of my favorite people in Dallas. And part of what she does is is transitional housing. And that's really a fitting sort of solution to the problems that she faces every day. But we spend a lot of time in transitional housing. And the most aggravating transitional housing he had 90 days. That 90 days is jumping through hoops someone else is defined. Last week, not today, but last week I was speaking with a man out on the street, and he pointed over to our new center, which is virtually complete, and he said, "Is there housing in there?" And I said, "No, there's not housing." He said, "Well, do you help people get housing?" And I said, "Well, that kind of depends." And he said, "On what?" And I said, "Well, what's your plan to get off the street?" He said, "My plan to get off the street?" I said, "Yeah, what is your plan to get off the street?" He said, "Well, I'm not sure. I've never really thought about that." I said, "Well, I don't have a plan for my life. I barely have a plan for my life. If your plan to get off the street includes housing, then certainly we will want to talk to you. Because we want to be in fellowship with you. We're part of your community. We want to know you, and we want you to know us, and we need each other. But it's your plan, not my plan." He liked that. It didn't get him into a house that day, but we've got to turn things somehow. Last week, a colleague of mine, we learned, and we were called to a meeting, we've learned that there have been some policy changes in a couple of one shelter and the bridge that has resulted in people being turned out on the street in great numbers, and they're going downtown in the central business district at night, and they're not really creating problems, but the police see them and people get nervous and this sort of thing. And so we were called to a meeting about this influx of homeless people downtown. And one of the solutions was, or one of the responses was to be homeless outreach teams like ours. Actually, downtown Dallas, John Crawford's outfit pays us at CitySquare to do homeless outreach in the central business. So we engage people and try to get them into housing. So one of my colleagues went out at midnight, and he encountered Big Richard, big homeless guy. And he sat down with Richard, and he started talking about his life. And he said, you go to the bridge, you stay in shelters. And Richard was so honest and so glad. And I won't do him justice, but you kind of got to get into this moment. I can see it. Man, he said, I just don't get into the shelters. He said, I've been to them, and he said, I got thrown out of the Salvation Army because I moved too slow. And he said, he said, the main thing about the shelters is everything's about a class. When we go to a class, alcoholism, class, drug addiction, I ain't got no problem with alcohol and drugs. I never have used alcohol and drugs. I'm homeless. He said, then they want to bring me, they want me to go see a psych doctor. Psych doctor? Me? I'm not crazy. Now that woman down there on the other end of the bench, she's crazy. But I'm not crazy. And then I went to another place, and I said, church. 6 days a week. Church, church, church. Man, that's enough church to kill a horse. Church? Not that much. You know what I need? Tell my friends. You know what I need? I need a place. I just need a place. And you don't have to scratch very deep on the life story of any homeless person until you hear that. I need a place. I don't need programs. I don't need answers. I don't need requirements. I just need peace. That's the best commercial I think I've ever heard for housing commercial. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But beyond that, there is a bias in America and in Dallas against the poor. And that bias ratchets up exponentially when the poor have also becomes. To the point that it has virtually become illegal to be homeless. And I continue to watch in varying degrees small-minded, fierce responses in the service sector, we got a real problem. Most of the police officers whose beat is downtown or in the areas where most homeless people congregate, most of those police officers are really amazing and allies. I think there are some exceptions, and the exceptions are usually cruel and difficult and problematic. Most of them are. But there is this bias working, yes. And then I would say that there's just a lack of awareness, no matter how much we talk about it. And there's also a lack of political, what I would say, I would describe it as appropriation of solve. We're going to break ground in November on, and we've been working on this a long time. It's been very difficult with funding. Because, I mean, homeless people, it's hard to raise money to really work on solutions because of this bias, because of the feeling that we've got it covered. You know, it's like, a shelter for homelessness is sort of like the emergency room to healthcare. And so it's hard to get over. But we're going to break ground in November on 50 single-family homes that we were out there across the street from the center that will, I think I probably heard you guys this before, that will house 50 of the most expensive homeless people in Dallas County. By that we mean those who use most parking services, inpatient and outpatient. It's costly and difficult to be homeless. The homeless folks, formerly homeless people, we house about 270 currently in our programs. They are very fragile physically. In one of our developments last year, 14% of the residents who were housing in this particular development died of natural causes because of pre-existing conditions created by the street by a long time outside. Housing is so key to survival. And so these 50 people we're going to house are the ones who use a lot of parking services. They also use a lot of the limited psychiatric services and dollars that we have in the county. And they also use disproportionately numbers of jail services because of this homelessness being illegal. I had a friend of mine, Roger, tell me what happened. His life was an unending parade, out of the shelter in the morning, walking around the circuit. He had 3 missions during the day. Where do I eat? Where do I relieve myself? Where do I sit down? Where I won't be hassled? It's that kind of unending parade. And somewhere along that parade route, police often get involved, especially if you medicate with alcohol or whatever. That's another dimension to the problem. But in these 50 homes, we're going to house 50 of these people. We know by name the 250 most expensive homeless people to Dallas County. The average cost to the county for each of those 250 people for a year, this doesn't include city costs or nonprofit costs, just county costs $40,000 a year to keep a person outside. We can house in a real nice environment, secure environment, safe environment, with high-touch concierge team services and 7-day-a-week psychiatric services. We can house people for less than 50, that way less than $15,000 a year. So that's saving the county over $25,000 per person in the house. And we're learning that to really get after this, you have to argue not about the human dimension or the morality or the ethic. You've got to argue about the return on investment. Well, that's okay. If we can make the case, it gets the job done. So we're going to build these 50 cottages as sort of a pilot. Because we think if we can demonstrate the impact of housing first, we can go a lot further than we did in the house. So, I mean, what can we do? Some of the things that are most effective are really hard. Just because of the nature of our lifestyles and our lack of opportunity. one of the most important things we can do, it's one of the hardest, is practical, is befriend someone who's on the street with the idea of receiving as much as you get. That's really hard. Because the call, I don't believe, is to go and fix something. I think the call of my life is to go and meet someone and understand something and have someone understand me who has a different life circumstance. One of the reasons why I wrote the book was that notion that everyone's rich and everyone's poor just in different ways, and there needs to be a reciprocity in our community among people. I can't solve all the problems for another person, just like they can't solve all the problems for me. But we could be friends. And it's amazing on that corner, and by the way, Lynn's been there, and y'all, you're welcome to come. It's an awesome time next 2 o'clock on Thursdays. I mean, it's just amazing how friendship goes. It's not about any program or delivering these services. It's just, hey, it's good to see you again, Larry. What's up? I mean, it's that. It's just the kind of basic things that we all kind of order our lives in, those relationships that are so important to us. I think if we could multiply those opportunities and experience those kinds of things, we might move the ball quicker in terms of, and further in terms of really solving the problem. And then kind of back to the ROI proposition, I think we need to develop ourselves and preach a different kind of enlightened self-interest. Because getting people off the street improves everything for everyone. It certainly improves life for somebody who's homeless. And housing is like an intervention on an alcoholic or a drug addict. It provides the platform for almost 90% of the people that we work to start over. And once they settle in and realize there's not a deadline at which time they have to leave, once they settle into that security, I can't tell you the number of people who tell me, oh my goodness, I feel like I've started my life. Are all their problems gone? No. In our housing, we really only have one requirement. After you pass the no axe murder, no pedophile test, there's only one requirement. Be a good neighbor. If you fall off the wagon, just make sure the wagon's in your house, not in the hall or in the common areas. Now, some people balk at that. I mean, you mean, Larry, you let someone in your apartments drink alcohol and get drunk, fall off the wagon? Well, not allowed, it just happens. The question is, what do you do when it happens? And the practical question is, what's the most cost-effective way to handle that? And then there's this question, do you really want a person who's a chronic inebriate on the street again, or would you really rather have them in my apartment complex? Or my team's dealing with it as friends and trying to be therapeutic. I mean, I think the mention that's fairly obvious. I don't think we want to go back on the side of it. So in our developments, we have people who regularly fall away. It's not the majority of people, but there's a percentage of people who struggle. And we attempt to be very redemptive in that situation. But if they bring that difficulty into the common area and compromise the community, then they got to go. And we press that through. Most people understand and respect it. But there is this enlightened self-interest, because if we can get people housed, not only do we save money and do the moral thing, everything gets better economically and socially. It's a cooperative kind of thing that goes on. And then I would just say, kind of move toward Q&A. I think we, and you guys do this better than anybody in town. And that doesn't reason we need to say this. I think we need to reread Jesus. We just need to reread Jesus. And we need to excise Paul and exalt the Revelers and just get on with the show. And even that, we need to read the prayer life. Even the Revelers need to read the prayer life. But we need to reread Jesus so that we can discover him. And we need to have eyes of, for, and perfect, and it kind of was, in some ways, it was a big blaze 30, 40 years ago, but the canons of liberation theology still float my boat and drive me forward. And I can't read the Gospels without thinking about the liberation of the people of Christ. And I really believe that's the enduring message of the New Testament. So I want to come here to Revelation guys. He's probably kind of tied the phone package. If you're people ask, why do you do what you do? Well, I'm motivated by this liberator who's liberated me from a lot of my mess. And I think has answered a lot of political and social questions. And I think the paradigm, the construct is intellectually honest and has great application because people suffer due to injustice. I was kind of nosing around the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The last time you read that, probably ought to read that more often. Everyone, Article 13, everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. And I know probably all this was more in vision when they wrote that, but I can make a big argument there, I think. Freedom of movement and residence. Article 25. Everyone has the right, and this is really the key. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security, I think again here, the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. Forgive the sexist language, but the message is still rather powerful. When you talk about housing as being a basic human right. Okay, so what do you think? Questions? Comments? Rotten things? Yes, sir.
I just think about the one that a piece you said back there. Where does the city or whoever keeps that one saying about the $40,000?
We're getting our information from the Dallas County Criminal Justice System and Ron Stretcher, who works with the folks at Parkland and the folks at MHMR Methodist in the case of Dallas County, and with the jail, and he's aggregating these numbers.
But there's got to be a lot of variation. It's not really an average of $40,000.
Yes. Oh yeah, so you got 250 names, the average is 40,000. So, a whole bunch of people will cost a whole lot more than that. And a whole bunch of people cost significantly less. Absolutely. This comes up, the whole notion of housing first around these cost metrics comes from Malcolm Gladwell got this whole thing started years ago when he wrote an essay for New York Magazine called $1 Million Murray. And there was a guy who lived in Reno, Nevada, who cost Reno, Nevada $1 million over the course of some short span of time to keep him on the street. And you could house a guy in Hilton or something. So that got people thinking about the cost-benefit analysis of permanent housing and what it costs communities to keep people continually on the streets instead of modest, adequate, clean, safe residential situations. And HUD has moved dramatically. This is, when I give President Bush 43 a lot of credit for his 16-year plan. The end homelessness included a shift away from transitional dollars to permanent supported housing. And the whole housing first model informed that strategy. And he endorsed that, blessed that, and I must say, he pushed it hard. He pushed it hard. Yes, sir.
I have one more thing that you might have mentioned, I guess, here. What has happened in the last 60 years with people not
So what has happened in the last 60 years that has seemed to create a shift away from families taking care of family members in these kinds of situations to the kinds of neglect we see today? I think that's a very interesting question. It probably deserves a lot of research, and probably the answer is pretty multi-dimensional. Probably has something to do with the growth of population. Probably has something to do with the aging of baby boomers. Probably has something to do with the criminalization of narcotics. Probably has something to do with the growth of addiction. I think there are many factors that begin to inform that social norm already. A lot of the people that I see on the corner who are dealing with drugs and alcohol will refer to their children, or they'll refer to their parents, or their brothers or sisters. But as you talk to the long-term homeless, especially those who are dealing with addictions, you pretty quickly pick up on the fact that families got a lot and was tired of giving up because of the length of time. And that does not argue for me a hopelessness. That is just one more part of the argument for housing first. Because if I can get a person in a house or in an apartment and I can develop a relationship through my team, we can help that person start over in a way that families can't. And you know, the whole deal, if you've dealt with any family member who's dealing with substance abuse, you know all the canons of codependency, all the complications of that, and what's the best way to respond. At some point, you have to either intervene or give up or whatever. It's tragic, sad, difficult, complicated, and the questions are very good. In the back, over here.
I grew up in a small rural northern community where there was some major issues with the state hospital. What role has closing of state hospitals and not providing that? And I should say also, many people in the community had one or two of the more stable patients living in their homes.
Yeah. So what happened to the state hospital system or the mental health system? The sole product was the organization of as many folks as possible back to the community with the promise that there would be a network of local community health clinics. And frankly, you know what happened there. They were completely underfunded or defunded. And great concept, great theory, but never had a chance because it was never funded. That's yes, ma'am.
I should mention that facility is now a prison.
Yeah.
And some of the same people
Yeah.
who were in the
Yes.
hospital
Yes.
are now in that
We criminalize addiction disproportionately so that we harvest male leadership out of African American communities in an ungodly immoral way. We see it every day. And we create these situations where little children don't have dads. And it feeds the violence. It feeds all the social ills we have. And you're right, we close those hospitals. We haven't funded local clinics and created networks closer to home. And we've made prisons profit centers. And it's unbelievable. You have been back over here.
So I was thinking about the nutrition, non-nutrition average, which is the top 250. And I was thinking about this question about some of the compositions that contribute to what's needed now as a community, cities, and counties to provide these types of services. And I know from my own that one of those lines that contribute is credentialization and the position job and pay. So a lot of people have jobs now that get out to hospitals on their own to find a way to pay for everything housing.
Sure, right.
And so I'm wondering how the evaluation, average evaluation of how much costs for about 250 votes could help us also have conversations about what wages might need to be so that long term we can say in our
great question about low-income people in general wages. We're not talking about homeless people. We're talking about a scale. Yeah. In my shop, CitySquare, last year, this year would be more, we had almost 55,000 different people come to our doors. Different individuals. And way over 90%, 98.9% probably percent of the people who came to us for services were working families. They weren't homeless. They were hanging on by the skin of their teeth. We got pulled into the homeless issue by Tom Dunning years ago, and we were happy to be playing there. But most of our work is with working families who can't make it because of exactly what you're talking about. Wages not keeping up with the cost of living. And skill sets not driving you toward those wages. And offshoring jobs. And NAFTA. Now we have a specific trade agreement coming up on the horizon. You know, it's a little like NAFTA on steroids. And we're going to everybody do much more jobs. And also the impact in those other countries needs to be looked at carefully because we know what happens. But wage justice is huge. And it drives people at the bottom to fall off into homelessness. Just the least little thing happens to upset that fine balance. We worked hard, thanks to Reverend Britt at CitySquare, on payday lending regulation and reform. That's just one piece of it. Wage adequacy is a real problem, and it's going to make everything worse. Is your question?
I get some question of this, so it has to do with the role of this.
Okay. Right. Here's a statistic. If you're Medicaid, the maximum mental health benefit for a Medicaid patient in Texas is $140 a month. If you're homeless, the maximum is $140. I have no idea the logic behind that, but that's what they pay. Well, you can see the inadequacy. We had a guy last week who came to the corner. He was just in a theater, and he said, I jumped on a train in Oklahoma City, and I got to Dallas. I just got to Fort Worth. I got over to Dallas. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm bipolar. I'm out of meds. I'm scared to death. I just need to get back to Oklahoma City. And we got to get back to Oklahoma City. He's fortunate to get a family who was willing to receive him back. He just kind of got off track somewhere. He ended up here of all places, which is not a good place to end up. Another lady walked up and she heard our conversation. She said, well, I really need to get back to California. And I said, you have family there? She said, well, yes, I do, but more than that, I got a warrant there. I said, you found out you had a warrant? She said, yes, I've got a warrant for my arrest. And she said, I just need to go back home and face it because it's going to keep myself straight down. But we have everything there. So, I mean, you confirm all the stories we have to be back to where they came from.
I know that you were talking about an expense being something that $40,000 was countywide. I live in a suburban city. Do any of the suburban cities do anything about this? I know there are little colonies of homeless people living around in various areas away from downtown. Are there any other programs going on out in the suburbs, or are they just rounding them up and taking them to Dallas?
A lot of suburban communities run regular van routes down the bridge. That I know for a fact. There are some churches, I'm quite certain, who are working sort of in a piecemeal, ad hoc fashion with homeless people. And, but I don't know of any. There is a common county group that's working some suburban areas, not all, but some, find it real easy to kind of dump people downtown.
I have a theological question, and I think you alluded to it, but let's, some of that I understand about. When you hear someone use what is what I call Christian nonsense, where they say, you don't work, you don't eat, and I think they come that's what it is.
This is verse that's not you know, Paul is, as I understand this one, is Paul's got a more of a church congregation convinced that broken chairs. Paul writes to a group who is convinced that Jesus is going to return in their lifetime. And they were so taken by that they just changed their entire lifestyle. And they stopped working, they just sat there waiting for him to come. And Paul's do what? There you go, Washington, D.C. Exactly. That's right. And I think Paul, when I read that, I mean, that's probably some kind of current wisdom of the day or something. I'm not sure the source, I can't remember if they ever did. But I mean, I think he's just pulling out everything you can think of to get them up off the rear ends and back up on life and all this. Well, then, but as he sees it, dangerous and practical view of the end and all of that. That's not very helpful to people today. And again, I have learned, I've been doing this downtown for almost 2 years, and I've learned that laziness and sorriness is kind of spread the same depth across the entire socioeconomic. I've known some lazy, sorry rich people, and I've known some lazy, sorry poor people. But the scale of poverty in Dallas cannot be explained by character faults or laziness in this year. 86, almost 90% of the school kids who go to the ISD qualify for grant and produce lunches. But here's the even more staggering thing. 71% of the public school students who go to school in Dallas County. And that includes communities like Garland, Richardson, Carrollton, Vernon, DeSoto, Duncanville, Mesquite, Highland Park, University Park. So we got a basic problem. Almost 40% of our population in Dallas is asset poor. Now that would be, if something tragic happened today, people live for 3 months in poverty. And 40%, 39.something%, we have to answer that question. That's a huge problem. And I think it goes back to wages. It goes back to how we share profits or how we count.
My congregation session said pretty much the opposite of what you said.
Sure you do.
So, you have any good advice for how I can get my job?
Be considered a move to Vermont. It's frustrating. There's a policy. It's so inevitable. It seems to exacerbate every problem.
I have not about the area around California recently signed a law raising the statewide minimum wage to $10.
Yes.
And part of his reason was to address the homeless issue. And I think that's being seen by the largest, most popular state in the country.
Absolutely.
And certainly there are Democrats on the college.
You know, the last time we went to LA and we looked at a couple of 50 projects I worked in, and I was told that there are over 70,000 homeless people in LA County, and 33,000 of those are chronic. That's an enormous problem. And so, yeah, there are ground seas that there was something just would that everyone consider that.
Let me say one thing. I just want to thank you for what you've done in the community to push on tough issues and without alienating people. Not that you haven't ruffled feathers, but that you maintain a position of great respect. And I think it's very important that we want to teach all of us about how to do both of those things. And I think the notion of befriending people is a very powerful concept. And certainly the home, having a home is a right, is a fundamental issue. But we come then to the whole thing about economic inequity, and it's a big issue. I mean, you can't ultimately solve a housing problem if people cannot earn enough money. You can't just keep building more houses and serving people. And you have thoughts. We used to talk years ago about the notion of wealth redistribution. That's sort of what you get in prison today, I guess. But that's what has to happen. And you have thoughts at that level about what it would take. And cost effectiveness, I've been in so many meetings or cost benefit things are discussed, and it's like, just like it has no effect at all. It is the most compelling argument, but ultimately it doesn't, rule the day.
Well, I've got this silly notion. And I got it from reading the book of wisdom. When was the last time I read the book of wisdom? I would challenge you to go back to the book of wisdom. Yeah, except for one. I agree totally. And I can get for a couple of them. But section 163 of the book of wisdom has the greatest statement I've ever read on politics. I can't remember the number of the section on healthcare, but it's one of the greatest statements you'll read. I think the United Methodists ought to universally agree to pursue those parts of the book of wisdom that change the culture in terms of justice. And I think we need to reinstitute the religious societies with an accountability gauge that's quite different from what the original ones employed. The accountability being how much have you pushed this week for justice in Dallas. And I think there are hundreds of thousands of us that could change the political culture if we studied it, committed to be held accountable by the values and acted. Do you realize that most of the congressional delegation from this community are Methodists? Almost all. And I think we've got, I discern, and you've got an exceptional pastor here who's not worried about this, but I discern a kind of evangelical wannabe run the church through something else. And I say that's the wrong turn. I've been there and I've done that. That's going to get you nowhere. But I think if we embraced our heritage in a radical way, in a really committed way, and organized in local churches and pushed the bishop to see that happened in every church. We don't even have a church and society committee in my church. We're trying to do it. But I think there's something about Methodism that could bring real answers. I don't think we can be apologetic about even our decline. The reason we decline is clear. Thank God we decline in the environment because of decline. Because you're talking about decline or a fundamentalism that doesn't do anything about the earth. I'll take decline every time. That's a mark of honor. And I think we need to return to the roots of the movement and apply some of Wesley's organizational genius and just repopulate the curriculum with concern for justice. And if you're not concerned about wages and health care and housing and children's education and equity and anti-racism, then you just need to get out of here. That's what we're about. I'm a simple man, so that's what I do.
There is a massive book about poverty that the United Methodist women wrote. We used that at our church last year. And then I have this
Yeah, I mean, wages have declined for the rest of the bottom. I mean, Wesley had an active, Wesley was just so excited. I mean, earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. That's addictive, it works, especially if you apply to what he meant, which is, what does it take for you to sustain you and your family, even if he was liberal, because he said, okay, take it on out the inheritance of the kids. Now what's left? We'll give all that away. Just don't even worry about it. Well, that can still be our economic strategy, but you can also apply that to public funding and tax code. Because part of the way I give it away is to be taxed for the good of the community. I just think we've got stuff here that's ours, and it's really good. It's really strong. It's really undeniable. You lay it alongside the metric of Jesus Christ, and you got a rugged consistency.
You just don't believe in the common good.
Exactly.
Larry, this is a question for you and kind of for the group. I'm thinking about your thoughts about friendship. And the question then becomes, where do we go and where do we start and how do we do that? And if there are some members of the group tonight that have done that on their own and established a friendship with the poor, working, whatever, how did that happen? Those among us who have done it. I'd just like to hear more about where we start with that or what guidance we get us.
Well, I'm no expert, and I realize there are a number of practical problems with that, just because of where we journey in the natural course of our life. When I go to that corner, it's a little artificial, because I just went over it. And I've got the freedom to just go there and sit down and just see what happens. But you can do that. I mean, you can go down to the bridge and just sit there. Or you can go, you can join me here, you can find another place. You can just hang out and, I'll pass that bottle of water and just have a conversation. I mean, poor people, quote unquote, are probably not as dangerous as a lot of people know. You just don't know. You just don't know. And I think we're besmirched with this incipient Calvinism that tells us some are in or some are out. And oh, by the way you prove you're in is to be rich, successful. I think that's the mark of election in America today, if you're a Calvinist. No reason why I'm not. And so we all battle this fear that, well, if a person's poor, certainly they're homeless, probably criminal, or they're dangerous, or they're violent. Well, some of them are not, because there's violence in every sector of the community. But it's not disproportionate among those who are extremely poor. You just find a lot of incredible people. And the other thing that I have here is just unspeakable professions of faith. I had a guy sitting down Sunday today, I said, how do you do that? He said, well, it's got to be better, but I know it will because of good Lord's in charge. I'm thinking, so that's what you find. I think it's not a programmatic thing, it's just kind of very human. Just go and hang out. Ride the bus, get on the dark. Yeah, get on the dark.
Well, I think we all deal with people who are poor all the time. Now, they may not be our best friends, but
Right.
how do you relate
Yeah.
to all of us?
That's really good. That's really good. People that are wait staff, people that are restaurants, people that are on the bus, people on the corner, whoever, where, that's really good. But common kindness is so important. The other thing I found is it is unbelievably important to figure out how to touch people physically. Especially once you get to know them, to put a hand on someone and then just express your delight that they're with you, that you know them, that they know you. There's something about that that is just indefinable and powerful. And it's not manipulative. It's just a value. I want to convey to you the value.
Can you ask the question rather than trying to understand why someone might be poor or why someone might be homeless? Might it serve us better if we're going to go and do to ask ourselves, why am I not poor?
Yeah.
Why am I not homeless? And really, because we've all had those instances. We've all had 1 month of savings last year that God has turned free with the maybe in the second and third. So ask ourselves why we did it, why we are poor, why we are homeless, and maybe that's the thing that we can do, because it was given to us, so we have it.
Right?
So if we ask that question, but we don't, we tend to ask why, how did it get this situation? Which is a compassionate question.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be, because you're really onto something there. I used to tell my girls, you know, if life is a football game, never forget you were born at 5-yard line. You're always 5-yard line. And there are people you're going to meet in life who aren't even in the parking lot yet. So don't be proud of your privilege. You've got plenty of it. Don't be proud of it and use it for something better than yourself.
The low minimum wage has been mentioned, but how many people are aware of those classes of workers who are exempt from being minimum wage?
Yeah, that's right. Minimum wage doesn't apply to local stuff, so interstate commerce, national chain and such. Yeah, it's meager. And then you got immigrant labor that's exploited terribly. You know, over half of our clientele are, we don't ask, but I know over half of them in some of our communities, and those people are at the mercy of contractors in the system. Somebody told me, this is really kind of embarrassing, somebody told me that the worst day for tips in their restaurant is Sunday at the church. Yes, sir.
I'm just thinking, is there a way to make it so that the type of institutions you're trying to build, when we, as progressives, build these things, we presuppose a declining economic environment. Right. An example of which somebody who I think does this very, very well and has done it for generations. Catholic brothers and sisters have done a wonderful job, and they've been doing it for generations. Right. And the reason they do that is so much of the Catholic Church is in third world countries. Right? So it's in Catholicism's interest, right, to create an institution-wide policy that presupposes an incredibly weak and, shall we say, less than productive economy. Right? I would like to see that. The idea being, and we kind of hoist conservatives on their own guard in the sense that we can always sell this. For instance, we're being told, recently there was a farm bill, and these conservatives said, our reasoning for separating the farm part from the food part is we want to work on the food part where all that inefficiency is. Right. If we demanded of our legislators, such legislators as, for instance, in a red state like Texas, such as we have, and we demanded that when you create legislation, factor into it a declining economy instead of an expanding. Right? How can we as liberals do that in a more
done something well there in that what we need to press on the people who make those decisions is when you separate the farm bill from the food bill, what you've done is not only have you hurt the poor, but you've also hurt retail merchants. You know, in 2010, Dallas County left over $500 million on the table that could have been spent in Kroger if we just fully enrolled everybody eligible for food stamps. But $500 million in the retail grocery sector, in just Dallas County. You know, it was billions, I think it was like 7 or 8 billion in the state. And money invested at the bottom, where you presuppose the declining situation, is spent immediately. Churns in the economy and has more impact than anything else. And it doesn't sit on the sidelines like Wall Street dollars or bank dollars. It churns and makes things better. So it's short-sighted, but you're right. I mean, what you're saying is really a fact.
So there are a lot of studies, and I'm sure some of us have read Henry Smith's book, Who Stole the American Dream. There is so much real data that says the best way to grow your economy is to increase minimum wages. Why? What is missing in people's logic so that they just don't see that?
You've heard all the arguments. Guys, the cost of jobs, and the hurts all employers. None of that's ever been proven in the case, but the media's problem is get out there and lie and let people believe it's the truth. That's why I think those of us who have a more progressive theological orientation and a great tradition of small groups and grassroots movements need to re-engage them. And we need to train our kids. Yeah, I'm not a leader, but